When the barn exploded into flames at 3 in the morning, Ethan Cole knew exactly who had finally made good on their threats. He stood in his front yard, shotgun loaded, while his 6-year-old daughter screamed from the bedroom window, and a billionaire heiress he'd married 3 months ago dialed 911 with shaking hands. This wasn't about land anymore. This was about erasing him completely. His Aunt Ruth had spent years waiting for him to break, but tonight she'd miscalculated, because the scared, desperate man who'd signed a marriage contract to save his farm was gone. And what she was facing now was something far more dangerous. If you want to see how a single father and a runaway billionaire survive a war they never asked for, stay until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The sky over the Cole farm had been the color of dirty dishwater for 3 straight days, and Ethan figured that was about right. Everything in his life had turned gray and flat sometime after Sarah died, and 4 years later, nothing had improved. He stood at the kitchen sink, watching the fields through a window so streaked with dust he could barely make out the fence line. The pump was acting up again. The tractor needed a part he couldn't afford. And Lily's school had called twice about the field trip payment he'd promised to send in. He dried his hands on a towel that had seen better decades and glanced at the calendar stuck to the refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a cow. Tuesday. Loan payment due Friday. He had about 60% of what the bank wanted, and Chester Mills at First National had stopped taking his calls. "Daddy, my cereal's soggy." Ethan turned. Lily sat at the table in her pajamas, the ones with the yellow ducks that were getting too small. Her brown hair stuck up in every direction, and she was poking at her bowl with a spoon like the flakes had personally offended her. "Then eat it faster next time," he said, but his voice didn't have any bite to it. Couldn't seem to find that gear anymore. "I don't like it soggy." Noted. He poured himself coffee from a pot that had been sitting since 5 that morning and took a drink. It tasted like burnt dirt, which was also about right. Through the window, he saw movement near the road. A car. No, not a car. Something sleek and black that didn't belong within 50 miles of here. It slowed at his driveway, then turned in. Ethan set his mug down and walked to the front door. Lily appeared beside him, craning her neck. "Who's that?" "Don't know." The vehicle came to a stop in front of the house, and for a long moment, nobody got out. Ethan stepped onto the porch. The wood creaked under his boots. He waited. Finally, the driver's door opened. A woman stepped out. She was younger than he'd expected, maybe 30, dressed in clothes that probably cost more than his last 3 mortgage payments combined. Dark hair pulled back tight. Sunglasses, even though the sky looked ready to spit rain. She moved like someone who'd spent her whole life being watched. She stopped a few feet from the porch and took off the sunglasses. Her eyes were sharp, cautious. The kind of eyes that had seen bad things and learned not to flinch. "Ethan Cole?" "That's right." "I'm Mara Bennett." She paused, like the name should mean something. When he didn't react, she added, "Richard Bennett's daughter." Ethan went still. Richard Bennett. He hadn't heard that name in years, but it hit him like a fist to the chest. The man who'd quietly paid off half his debts when Sarah got sick. The man who'd sent a lawyer with paperwork that kept the bank from foreclosing when Ethan couldn't make 3 payments in a row. The man who'd never asked for anything in return and had refused every attempt Ethan made to thank him. "Your father," Ethan said carefully, "did a lot for me. I tried to reach him a few times, but he died." The words landed flat and hard. Mara's face didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Grief, maybe. Or anger. Hard to tell. "I'm sorry," Ethan said, and meant it. "He left something for you." She reached into her bag and pulled out an envelope. Expensive paper, the kind that felt heavy. "He made me promise I'd deliver it myself." Ethan took the envelope. His name was written on the front in handwriting he didn't recognize. He looked up at Mara, but she'd already turned back toward the car. "Wait," he said. "You drove all the way out here just to hand me a letter?" She stopped, turned. There was something raw in her expression now, something she hadn't meant to show. "He also suggested," she said slowly, "that you might be able to help me." "Help you with what?" "Surviving." Lily watched from the window as the fancy lady sat at their kitchen table, not touching the coffee Daddy had poured for her. She looked like someone from TV, perfect and shiny and wrong, like a puzzle piece from a different box. Ethan read the letter twice, then a third time. When he finally set it down, he didn't speak for a long while. "This is a joke," he said eventually. "It's not. Your father wants me to marry you." "Wanted," Mara corrected. Past tense, and no, not exactly. He suggested that a legal alliance might be mutually beneficial given our respective situations. "That's a hell of a way to say it." Mara leaned back in her chair. She looked exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with the drive. "My father spent his whole life building an empire. When he got sick, the vultures started circling. Board members, investors, distant relatives I'd never even met. They waited until he was too weak to fight back, and then they made their move. By the time he died, I was already being pushed out of my own company, my own inheritance. So go to court." "I did. I am." "But they're not just fighting me in court. They're fighting me everywhere. Reputation, finances, security. 2 weeks ago, someone tried to run me off the road. Last week, my apartment was broken into. Nothing stolen, just rearranged. A message." Ethan stared at her. "And you think marrying a broke farmer in the middle of nowhere is going to fix that? I think disappearing for a while might keep me alive long enough to regroup. I think having legal ties to someone with no connection to my world makes me harder to isolate. I think my father knew exactly what kind of war I was walking into, and he spent his last days trying to give me a way out. What do I get out of it?" Mara didn't blink. "Money. Enough to save your farm, pay off your debts, and give your daughter a future that doesn't involve watching you work yourself to death." The words hit harder than they should have. Ethan felt his jaw tighten. "I don't need charity." "It's not charity. It's a transaction. You give me a place to hide and a legal shield. I give you financial stability. We both get what we need." "For how long?" 6 months, maybe a year. However long it takes for me to turn the situation around." "And then what?" "Then we dissolve the marriage quietly, and I go back to my life. You keep the money. Clean break." Ethan looked at the letter again. Richard Bennett had written about trust, about second chances, about how sometimes the only way forward was to bet on something that made no sense. He'd written about Ethan's character, his resilience, his ability to protect the people he loved. And he'd written about his daughter, about how she'd inherited his stubbornness but not his ruthlessness, and how that might get her killed. "I need to think about it," Ethan said. Mara nodded. She stood, picked up her bag. "I'm staying at the motel off Route 7. You have until tomorrow." "Why the deadline?" "Because they're looking for me. And the longer I stay in one place, the more danger I'm in." She walked to the door. Ethan followed. Lily was still at the window, watching everything with wide eyes. "One more thing," Mara said, pausing at the threshold. "If you say yes, this has to look real. Publicly, I mean. I can't have people thinking this is some kind of scam or arrangement. It has to be believable." "So you want me to lie?" "I want you to act married. There's a difference." She left before he could respond. Ethan stood on the porch and watched the black car disappear down the driveway. When he turned around, Lily was right behind him. "Is she a princess?" Lily asked. "No, baby. Just someone with too much money and not enough sense." "Are you going to marry her?" Ethan looked at his daughter. 6 years old, still wearing pajamas with ducks on them, already learning that the world didn't give you anything you didn't fight for. "I don't know yet," he said. That night, after Lily was asleep, Ethan sat at the kitchen table with a calculator, a pile of bills, and a bottle of whiskey he'd been saving for a special occasion. This didn't qualify, but he opened it anyway. He ran the numbers 3 times, hoping they'd change. They didn't. Even if he sold the truck, the furniture, and every piece of equipment that wasn't actively keeping the farm alive, he'd still come up short. The bank would foreclose by the end of the month. He'd lose the land, the house, everything Sarah's family had built over 3 generations. And Lily would lose the only home she'd ever known. He poured 2 fingers of whiskey and drank it in one swallow. It burned going down, but not enough to distract him from the cold arithmetic of failure. The letter sat next to the bills. He read it again. "Ethan, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I'm sorry I couldn't do more while I was still around. My daughter is smart, capable, and stronger than she knows, but she's walking into a fight that will destroy her if she faces it alone. You know what it's like to lose everything. You know what it takes to keep going when the world tells you to quit. I'm not asking you to save her. I'm asking you to give her a chance to save herself. Whatever you decide, know that I trusted you with the most important thing I had left. Richard. Ethan closed his eyes. He thought about Sarah, about the promises he'd made to her before she died. He thought about Lily, about the future she deserved. He thought about the farm, about the blood and sweat his family had poured into this land for 100 years. And then he thought about a woman with sharp eyes and a voice that didn't shake even when she was talking about people trying to kill her. He reached for his phone. Peter. Mara answered on the second ring. I'll do it, Ethan said. But I have conditions. There was a pause, then, I'm listening. Lily comes first. Whatever this arrangement is, whatever happens, she doesn't get hurt. You don't make promises to her you can't keep, and you don't treat her like she's part of some business deal. Agreed. Second, the money goes into a trust for her. Not for the farm, not for me, for her future. Those are the terms. Another pause. Longer this time. Fine, Mara said. Anything else? Yeah. When this is over, you walk away clean. No drama, no mess. You go back to your world, and we stay in ours. That was always the plan. Just making sure we're clear. We are. Ethan leaned back in his chair. Outside, the wind was picking up, rattling the windows. A storm coming in. When do you want to do this? He asked. As soon as possible. I'll have my lawyer draw up the paperwork. We can make it legal by the end of the week. That fast? I told you, Ethan, people are looking for me. The longer I wait, the worse this gets. He rubbed his face with his free hand. This is insane. Probably, Mara said, but it's the best option either of us has right now. She was right, and he hated that. Hated that his life had come down to marrying a stranger to keep a roof over his daughter's head. Hated that this was what survival looked like. All right, he said, end of the week. I'll be there tomorrow with the paperwork. We can go over the details. Fine. He hung up before she could say anything else. Then he poured another drink and stared at the bills until the numbers blurred together. Mara showed up the next afternoon with a lawyer, a briefcase, and an expression that suggested she hadn't slept. Ethan met them on the porch. Lily was at school, which was probably for the best. The lawyer's name was Greaves. He was older, gray-haired, and had the kind of face that had seen too many bad divorces. He shook Ethan's hand with a grip that felt like a test. Mr. Cole, I understand you and Miss Bennett are entering into a rather unusual arrangement. That's one way to put it. I've prepared the necessary documents, prenuptial agreement, financial disclosures, custody arrangements should any issues arise. Everything is designed to protect both parties. They sat at the kitchen table. Greaves spread papers across the surface like he was dealing cards. Ethan tried to follow along, but half the language was legal jargon that made his head hurt. Bottom line, he said, cutting Greaves off mid-sentence, what am I actually signing here? You're agreeing to a temporary marriage with clear financial boundaries, Greaves said. Ms. Bennett will provide a lump sum payment upon signing, with additional funds released at 6-month intervals. In exchange, you provide legal status as her spouse and a private residence. Should the marriage dissolve, which it will after the agreed-upon term, you retain all financial assets transferred to you. Ms. Bennett retains all assets she brought into the marriage. And if something goes wrong, define wrong. If someone tries to hurt her, or Lily, or me. Greaves glanced at Mara, who hadn't said a word since they arrived. She was standing by the window, arms crossed, watching the fields. There are provisions for security, Greaves said carefully. Ms. Bennett has hired a private firm to monitor the property. They'll be discreet. I don't want armed guards walking around my farm. They won't be visible, Mara said, turning from the window. But they'll be close. I'm not taking chances. Ethan looked at her. Really looked. Under the expensive clothes and the perfect posture, she was scared. Trying hard not to show it, but scared all the same. All right, he said. Where do I sign? They got married on a Thursday at the county courthouse. No guests, no flowers, no music, just a judge who looked bored and a clerk who kept checking her watch. Ethan wore the same suit he'd worn to Sarah's funeral. Mara wore black, which felt appropriate. The whole thing took less than 10 minutes. When the judge pronounced them married, neither of them moved to kiss. They shook hands instead, like they'd just closed a real estate deal. Outside, the sky was overcast again. Ethan stood on the courthouse steps while Mara talked to Greaves about transferring funds. A couple walked past them, laughing about something. They looked happy. Real. Mr. Cole, Ethan turned. Greaves was holding out a folder. First payment has been processed. It should appear in your account within 24 hours. Ethan took the folder. Inside was a bank statement showing a number that made his stomach drop. More money than he'd seen in his entire life. This is too much, he said. It's what we agreed on, Mara said. She was standing next to Greaves now, her expression unreadable. You're taking a risk. This is compensation. I didn't do this for the money. I know, but you're getting it anyway. They drove back to the farm in separate cars. Ethan's truck rattled and coughed the whole way. Mara's sleek black vehicle followed at a careful distance. When they pulled into the driveway, Lily was sitting on the porch with her backpack, waiting. She looked at Mara, then at Ethan. Did you do it? She asked. Yeah, baby, we did it. So she's staying here now? For a while. Lily considered this. Then she walked over to Mara and stuck out her hand, very serious. I'm Lily. I'm 6. I can read chapter books and I know all the state capitals. Mara shook her hand. I'm Mara. I'm 30. I can't do either of those things. That's okay. I can teach you. Something shifted in Mara's face. Not quite a smile, but close. I'd like that, she said. Heat. The first week was strange. Mara moved into the guest room, which Ethan had spent 2 days cleaning and another day trying to make look less depressing. She didn't bring much. A few suitcases, a laptop, and a locked case she kept under the bed. She was quiet. Spent most of her time in her room or on the porch, always on the phone, always working. Ethan heard fragments of conversations, lawyers, accountants, board members. Her voice was different on those calls, harder, sharper. The voice of someone who'd spent her whole life fighting for respect. Lily, on the other hand, was fascinated. She followed Mara around like a shadow, asking questions, showing off her toys, demanding attention. Mara handled it better than Ethan expected. She didn't brush Lily off or talk down to her. She listened, answered questions, even played a few games. One night, Ethan came downstairs and found them sitting at the kitchen table. Lily was teaching Mara how to play Go Fish. Mara was losing badly and didn't seem to mind. Got any threes? Lily asked. Go Fish. Lily grinned and drew a card. You're not very good at this. I'm learning. Ethan stood in the doorway, watching. This wasn't part of the plan. This easy domesticity, this weird little routine. It wasn't supposed to feel like anything. Mara looked up and caught his eye. For a second, neither of them said anything. Then Lily slapped down a pair of queens and announced victory. And the moment passed. By the second week, people in town had started talking. Ethan heard it at the feed store. Mara Bennett, billionaire heiress, hiding out on the Cole farm. Married to a widower with a kid and a failing operation. People couldn't decide if it was romantic or suspicious. Most were leaning towards suspicious. You gonna tell us what's really going on? Jack Harmon asked, leaning against the counter with his arms crossed. He ran the store and had known Ethan since they were kids. Because this whole thing smells funny. Nothing to tell, Ethan said. We got married. That's it. Come on, man. She shows up out of nowhere, you marry her a week later, and now she's living in your house? What'd she do, offer you money? Ethan kept his face neutral. She didn't have to offer me anything. I wanted to marry her. Bullshit. Think whatever you want, Jack. I don't care. But he did care, because the gossip was spreading, and it was only a matter of time before it got back to the one person he really didn't want hearing it. Ruth Cole. His aunt showed up on a Sunday. Ethan was fixing the fence near the road when he saw her truck coming up the drive. Big, white, pristine. She climbed out wearing her church clothes and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Ethan, she said, I heard the strangest rumor. He set down the hammer and faced her. Ruth, they're saying you got married to some rich girl from the city. She laughed, but it sounded forced. I told them that couldn't be right. You'd have mentioned something like that to your family. It's right. The smile slipped. Excuse me? Her name's Mara. We got married 2 weeks ago. Ruth stared at him, then her face went hard. You've got to be kidding me. I'm not. After everything I've done for you, after all the times I offered to help with this place, You go and marry some stranger without even telling me. You didn't offer to help, Ruth. You offered to buy me out for half of what the land's worth. Because you're drowning, Ethan. Because you can't keep this place running on your own. I'm managing. With her money, you mean? Ethan didn't answer. Ruth's eyes narrowed.
That's what this is, isn't it? She's paying you. This whole marriage is a scam. You don't know what you're talking about.
Don't I? Ruth stepped closer. I know desperation when I see it. I know what a man looks like when he's selling himself. And I know that whatever deal you made with that woman, it's going to blow up in your face. I think you should leave. I'm trying to help you. No, you're trying to take what's mine, same as you've been trying to do for years. Ruth's face flushed. This land should have been mine. Your father promised. My father's dead, and this farm stays with me. They stood there, locked in a stare that felt like all the fights they'd never had finally boiling over. Then Ruth turned and walked back to her truck. Before she got in, she looked back at him. You just made a big mistake, Ethan. She drove off, kicking up dust. Ethan stood there for a long time, watching the road. A cold feeling settled in his gut. Ruth didn't make empty threats. If she said something was a mistake, she meant she was going to make him pay for it. That night, he told Mara what happened. They were sitting on the porch. Lily was asleep. The sky was clear for once, stars scattered like broken glass. She's going to be a problem, Ethan said. Mara didn't look surprised. She wants the farm. She's wanted it since my father died. Tried to buy it when I was barely keeping my head above water. When I refused, she started working angles, talked to the bank, the town council, anyone who'd listen. Made it harder for me to get loans, to get help. Why does she want it so badly? Family legacy, control, maybe just spite. Hard to say with Ruth. Mara leaned back in her chair. We knew there'd be complications. This is more than a complication. Ruth doesn't stop. She'll dig until she finds something she can use against us. Then we make sure there's nothing to find. Ethan looked at her. You ever dealt with someone like her? I've dealt with worse. People who smile while they destroy you. People who think power means they can take whatever they want. Her voice was calm, but there was steel underneath. Your aunt doesn't scare me. She should. Maybe. But I didn't come here to run from fights. I came here to survive long enough to win one. They sat in silence for a while. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called out. The wind moved through the fields, making the grass whisper. You're different than I thought you'd be, Ethan said. How so? I figured you'd be softer, more, I don't know, fragile. Mara smiled, but it was bitter. My father used to say the same thing. He thought because I didn't enjoy the ruthless parts of business, I wasn't cut out for it. But there's a difference between not liking something and not being able to do it. What changed? He died. And I realized that everyone who'd been waiting for me to fail was right about one thing. I couldn't do it his way. So I had to find my own. And this is it? Hiding on a farm in Nebraska? This is regrouping. This is buying time. When I'm ready, I'll go back and finish what he started. But on my terms. Ethan studied her. In the dim porch light, she looked younger, tired, human. You miss him, he said. Every day. Yeah, Ethan said quietly. I know how that feels. Mara glanced at him. For a second, he thought she might ask about Sarah, but she didn't. Just nodded and looked back out at the fields. They sat there until the cold drove them inside. The trouble started small. First, it was the bank. Chester Mills called to say there'd been some concerns raised about Ethan's recent financial activity. Large deposits, sudden payments. Nothing illegal, of course, but perhaps worth discussing. Ethan told him it was none of his business. Chester said he was just doing his job. Then it was the school. Lily came home with a note saying that several parents had expressed concerns about her home environment. A social worker would be stopping by for a routine visit. Ethan crumpled the note and threw it in the trash. What's wrong? Mara asked. She was at the stove, making dinner, something that actually smelled good for once. They're already moving. Who? Ruth, the town. Everyone who thinks this marriage is fake and I'm using you for money. Mara set down the spoon. What do you need? I need them to back off. Then we give them what they want, which is proof that this is real. The social worker came on a Wednesday. Her name was Linda Pryor, and she had the kind of smile that was designed to put people at ease, but only made Ethan more tense. She sat in the living room with a clipboard, asking questions about routines, schedules, Lily's emotional state. Mara sat next to Ethan on the couch, her hand resting on his knee. It was the first time they'd touched in public, and it felt alien. Wrong. But Linda's eyes tracked the gesture, and something in her expression softened. "And how long have you two been together?" Linda asked. "We met a few months ago," Mara said smoothly. "It was unexpected, but sometimes the best things are. And Lily's adjusting well?" "She's doing great," Ethan said. "Mara's been good with her." Linda made a note. "It's just that sudden changes can be hard on children, especially after a loss." "I know," Ethan said, "but Lily's tougher than people think." Linda asked a few more questions, then said she'd like to speak with Lily alone. Ethan didn't like it, but he didn't have a choice. They waited in the kitchen. Mara poured coffee, neither of them drank. After 20 minutes, Linda came back. She smiled, thanked them for their time, and said everything seemed fine. When she left, Ethan felt like he'd been holding his breath for an hour. "That was too close," he said. Mara nodded. "She's testing us, trying to find cracks." "Ruth put her up to it." "Probably." Ethan leaned against the counter. "This is going to get worse before it gets better." "I know. You sure you're ready for that?" Mara met his eyes. "Are you?" He didn't have an answer. What? By the end of the month, the attacks escalated. Someone slashed the tires on Ethan's truck. Someone else spray-painted Gold Digger across the side of the barn. And then, late one night, Ethan woke to the sound of breaking glass. He grabbed the shotgun from the closet and moved downstairs. Mara was already in the hallway, holding a phone. "I called the police," she whispered. "Stay with Lily." He went to the kitchen. The window over the sink was shattered, glass scattered across the floor. A rock sat in the middle of the mess, a note tied around it with twine. Ethan picked it up. The note said, "Leave while you still can." He stood there, staring at the words, feeling something cold and sharp settle in his chest. This wasn't just intimidation anymore. This was a warning. When Sheriff Whitmore arrived, he took statements, bagged the rock, and promised to look into it. But his tone suggested he already knew who was responsible and didn't plan to do much about it. After he left, Ethan and Mara sat at the kitchen table. The broken window let in cold air. Neither of them moved to cover it. "This is because of me," Mara said. "No, this is because of Ruth. She wouldn't be doing this if I weren't here. She'd be doing something. Ruth doesn't need an excuse." Mara looked at him. "I can leave, dissolve the marriage, disappear. You and Lily would be safe. And you'd be dead in a week." "Maybe." "Not maybe. Definitely." She didn't argue, just looked down at her hands. Ethan noticed for the first time how much weight she'd lost since arriving, how the shadows under her eyes had deepened. "We're not running," he said. "Then what are we doing?" "We're fighting back." Mara lifted her head. "How?" "I don't know yet, but we'll figure it out." They sat there in the cold, broken kitchen, two people who'd stumbled into each other's wars without knowing if either of them would survive. Outside, the wind picked up. The field stretched dark and endless. And somewhere out there, Ruth Cole was planning her next move. 9:14. The security company Mara hired arrived 3 days after the broken window. Two men in plain clothes who drove an unmarked van and set up cameras so discreet, Ethan didn't notice them until one of the guys pointed them out. They installed motion sensors along the perimeter, reinforced the locks, and gave Mara a panic button that looked like a car key fob. Ethan hated all of it. Hated that his home felt like a fortress. Hated that Lily asked why there were cameras in the trees. Hated that he couldn't fix this problem the way he fixed everything else, with his hands and enough stubborn persistence to outlast the trouble. "You don't have to like it," Mara said. They were standing in the barn, watching one of the security guys check the wiring on a sensor. "You just have to accept it." "I don't accept strangers crawling all over my property. They're not strangers. They're professionals." "Same thing out here." Mara looked at him. She'd started dressing differently over the past few weeks. Less polished, more practical. Jeans that actually fit the work, boots that had seen mud. Her hair was usually pulled back in a ponytail now. No makeup, no pretense. She looked more real, And somehow that made everything harder.
Ruth's not going to stop, Mara said. You know that, right? The rock through the window was just the beginning. I know. So we either leave or we prepare for worse. Ethan ran a hand through his hair.
He hadn't slept well in days. Every sound outside made him reach for the shotgun. Every car that passed the property made his stomach tighten. I'm not leaving, he said. Then stop fighting me on this. She walked out before he could respond. Ethan stood there, surrounded by equipment and wires and the quiet hum of surveillance, and felt like a stranger in his own life. That night, Lily had a nightmare. Ethan heard her crying and went to her room. She was sitting up in bed, clutching her stuffed rabbit, tears streaking her face. Hey, baby, what's wrong? I dreamed the bad people came back. Ethan sat on the edge of her bed. What bad people? The ones who broke the window. I dreamed they came inside and hurt you. He pulled her close. She was shaking. 6 years old and already learning that the world wasn't safe, that people you loved could be taken away without warning. Nobody's going to hurt me, he said. I promise. But what if they do? They won't. You don't know that. She was right, and it gutted him. He didn't know that. Couldn't promise her anything except that he'd fight like hell to keep her safe. And sometimes that wasn't enough. The door creaked open. Mara stood in the hallway, wearing an oversized shirt and looking uncertain. I heard crying, she said. Is she okay? Lily pulled back from Ethan and looked at Mara. I had a bad dream. I'm sorry. Mara stepped into the room, hesitant. Those are the worst. Do you get bad dreams? Sometimes. What do you do? Mara glanced at Ethan, then sat on the other side of the bed. I try to think about something good. Something that makes me feel safe. Like what? Like, when I was little, my dad used to take me to this lake. We'd sit on the dock and he'd tell me stories about the stars. He said every star was a wish someone made that came true. Lily's eyes widened. Really? That's what he told me. I don't know if it's true, but it made me feel better. Can you tell me a story? Mara looked at Ethan. He nodded, even though he didn't know why. She turned back to Lily and started talking, her voice low and steady, spinning some tale about a girl who collected stars in jars. Ethan listened, watching his daughter's face relax, her breathing even out. By the time Mara finished, Lily was asleep. They stood in the hallway after, neither of them speaking. Finally, Mara said, She's a good kid. Yeah. You're doing a good job with her. Ethan didn't know what to say to that. He'd spent 4 years feeling like he was failing, like every decision was the wrong one, like Sarah would have done everything better. Thanks, he said eventually. Mara nodded and went back to her room. Ethan stood there for a while longer, staring at Lily's closed door, trying to figure out when this temporary arrangement had started feeling like something else. The next morning, Ruth made her next move. Ethan was in town picking up supplies when he ran into Dale Patterson, who owned the hardware store and served on the county board. Dale had always been friendly, but today he looked uncomfortable. Ethan, got a minute? Sure. Dale glanced around, then lowered his voice. Look, I wanted to give you a heads up. Ruth came to the board meeting last night. She's raising questions about your marriage. Ethan's jaw tightened. What kind of questions? Fraud. She's saying it's a sham, that you married this woman for money, and you're both scamming the system. That's bullshit. I know, but she's got people listening. She brought up the sudden financial deposits, the fact that you barely knew this woman before you married her. She's pushing for an investigation. Into what? Tax fraud, welfare fraud, anything she can make stick. Ethan felt his hands curl into fists. She can't do that. She can try. And with the right pressure, she might succeed. Dale hesitated. I'm telling you this because I like you, Ethan, but you need to be careful. Ruth's got influence, and she's using it. Ethan drove home fast, his mind racing. When he pulled into the driveway, Mara was on the porch with her laptop. She took one look at his face and closed it. What happened? He told her. All of it. When he finished, Mara was quiet for a long time. She's trying to force us into a corner, she said finally. Make the marriage so toxic that I leave or you dissolve it. What do we do? We double down. Meaning, Mara stood up. Meaning we stop acting like this is fake. We go public.
We make this marriage so visible, so documented, that questioning it makes her look petty and obsessed.
How? We start going places together. We let people see us as a couple. We build a narrative that's stronger than whatever she's trying to spin. Ethan stared at her. You want us to pretend to be in love. I want us to pretend to be married. There's a difference. Not to people watching. Then we sell it better. He wanted to argue, wanted to say this was a line he wasn't willing to cross. But the alternative was losing everything, and he'd already decided that wasn't an option. Fine, he said. What do you need me to do? That Sunday, they went to church. Ethan hadn't been since Sarah's funeral, and walking through those doors felt like reopening a wound that hadn't healed right. But Mara had insisted, said it was exactly the kind of public appearance that would help. They sat in the back, Lily between them. People stared, whispered. Ethan could feel the weight of their judgment pressing down like a physical thing. Mara sat straight-backed and calm, her hand resting on his arm. To anyone watching, they looked like a normal family. Ethan felt like a fraud. After the service, people approached. Some were genuinely curious, others fishing for gossip. Mara handled them with practiced ease, smiling and deflecting and giving just enough information to seem open without actually revealing anything. Ruth was there, of course. She stood near the entrance with a group of women from her social circle watching. When Ethan caught her eye, she smiled. It was the kind of smile that promised consequences. On the drive home, Lily chattered about the other kids she'd seen. Mara responded, asking questions, keeping her engaged. Ethan drove in silence, his hands tight on the wheel. You did good, Mara said once Lily ran inside. I felt like a liar. You are a liar. So am I. That's the deal we made. Doesn't make it easier. Mara looked at him. You think I like this? You think I enjoy parading around pretending everything's fine when I'm waiting for the next attack? Then why are we doing it? Because the alternative is worse. She got out of the truck and went inside. Ethan sat there staring at the farmhouse, trying to remember when his life had made sense. The attacks continued, but they were subtler now. Rumors spread through town. Someone filed a complaint about the farm's livestock, claiming health violations that didn't exist. The county inspector showed up, found nothing wrong, but the damage was done. People talked. Ethan's truck started having problems. The mechanic said it looked like someone had put sugar in the gas tank. No proof, of course. Just another coincidence. Then the bank called. Chester Mills, sounding apologetic but firm, said they needed to schedule a meeting to discuss Ethan's accounts. Irregularities had been flagged. Nothing serious, probably just a misunderstanding, but it needed to be addressed, Ethan told Mara. She made a call to her lawyer. Greaves showed up 2 days later with a file thick enough to stop a bullet. Ruth Cole is building a case, Greaves said. They were in the kitchen, papers spread across the table. She's trying to prove financial fraud. The theory is that Ms. Bennett paid you to marry her, which could be construed as immigration fraud, tax evasion, or a dozen other charges. But we're both American citizens, Ethan said. Doesn't matter. The appearance of impropriety is enough to trigger investigations, audits, legal headaches that could drag on for years. Can she actually make any of it stick? Not if we're careful. But she can make your life hell trying. Mara leaned forward. What do we need to do? Document everything. Every interaction, every financial transaction, every public appearance. Build a paper trail that supports the legitimacy of this marriage. And for the love of all that's holy, do not give her anything she can use. After Greaves left, Ethan and Mara sat in silence. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the fields in shades of orange and gold. It would have been beautiful if Ethan could have focused on anything except the tightening noose around his life. I'm sorry, Mara said quietly. For what? For bringing this into your life, for making you a target. You didn't make me do anything. I chose this. You chose survival. That's different. Ethan looked at her, really looked. She'd lost more weight. Her hand shook slightly when she thought no one was watching. Whatever she'd left behind in her old life was still chasing her, and now it had caught up. Are you okay? He asked. Mara blinked, surprised. What? You heard me. Are you okay? She opened her mouth, closed it. For a second, he thought she might actually tell him the truth. Then the mask came back up. I'm fine. Bullshit. Ethan, You're not sleeping, you barely eat, and you spend half the day on the phone fighting people who want to destroy you, so don't tell me you're fine. Mara's jaw tightened. What do you want me to say? I want you to stop pretending this isn't hard. I want you to stop acting like you're handling everything when you're clearly not. I don't have the luxury of not handling it. Maybe you should. And then what? Fall apart? Let them win? No. Let someone help you. Mara stared at him. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then she stood up, grabbed her laptop, and left the room. Ethan sat there, feeling like he'd just lost a fight he didn't know he was having. That weekend, they took Lily to the county fair. It was Mara's idea. Another public appearance, another chance to look like a real family. Ethan agreed because he was running out of reasons to say no. The fairgrounds were packed, families everywhere, kids running wild, the smell of fried food and livestock thick in the air. Lily was in heaven. She dragged them from booth to booth, pointing at everything, begging for tickets to ride the Ferris wheel. Mara bought her a stuffed bear that was almost as big as she was. Lily hugged it like it was made of gold. You didn't have to do that, Ethan said. I wanted to. They walked through the crowd. People noticed them. Some smiled, some whispered. Ethan kept his expression neutral, but his shoulders were tense. He hated being watched, hated feeling like every move was being judged. Relax, Mara said quietly. You look like you're about to fight someone. Maybe I am. Well, don't. We're supposed to be happy. Right. Happy. Mara stopped walking, turned to face him. Look, I know this is hard, but we're here. We're doing this. So either commit to the act or go home. Ethan met her eyes. There was frustration there, but also something else. Exhaustion. The same bone-deep tiredness he felt every time he woke up and remembered his life was a performance now. Fine, he said. He took her hand. It was a small gesture, barely noticeable in the crowd, but Mara's eyes widened slightly and her fingers tensed before relaxing into his. They stood there for a beat, connected in a way that felt both false and uncomfortably real. Then Lily came running back, and the moment broke. They rode the Ferris wheel as the sun set. Lily sat between them, pointing at the lights below, chattering about how she could see their farm from up here. Mara smiled and played along. Ethan watched the horizon and tried not to think about how much this felt like a life he'd never actually have. When they got to the top, the wheel stopped. Lily gasped and pressed her face to the glass. Below them, the fair spread out like a constellation. It's so pretty, Lily said. Yeah, Mara said softly. It is. Ethan glanced at her. She was looking out at the view, but there was something distant in her expression, like she was seeing something else entirely. You miss it, he said quietly. Your old life. Mara didn't answer right away. Then, parts of it. Which parts? The control, knowing what I was fighting for, having a plan that made sense. And now? Now I'm making it up as I go and hoping I don't get us all killed. The wheels started moving again. They descended in silence. On the drive home, Lily fell asleep in the back seat, the stuffed bear clutched to her chest. Mara stared out the window. Ethan focused on the road. Thank you, Mara said eventually. For what? For today. For trying. It's what we agreed to. I know, but still. Ethan didn't respond, didn't know what to say. The truth was, today hadn't felt like an act, and that scared him more than anything Ruth could throw at them. When they got home, there was another message. This one was spray-painted across the side of the barn in letters 3 feet tall. Fake. Ethan stood in the driveway, staring at it. Mara came up beside him, her face pale. She's escalating, Mara said. No kidding. We need to call the police. They won't do anything, you know that. Then what? Ethan turned to look at her. Then we stop playing defense. What does that mean? It means we find out what Ruth's hiding and we hit her with it before she hits us again. Mara's eyes narrowed. You think she's hiding something? Everyone's hiding something. We just need to find out what. The next day, Ethan called in a favor. Tommy Reeves had been his friend since high school. He'd left town years ago, worked in finance in Omaha, and had a talent for digging up information people didn't want found. Ethan hadn't talked to him in months, but Tommy answered on the second ring. Ethan Cole. Thought you were dead. Not yet. I heard you got married to a billionaire. News travels. It does when it's that weird. What do you need? Ethan told him. Tommy listened without interrupting, then whistled low.
You want me to investigate your aunt. Can you do it? Probably, but it's going to cost you. How much? Dinner next time I'm in town. And you tell me the real story about this marriage. Deal. Tommy said he'd get back to him in a week. Ethan hung up and found Mara watching from the doorway. Who was that? Someone who might be able to help. Help how? By finding out what Ruth doesn't want us to know. Mara crossed her arms. You think this is a good idea?
You got a better one? She didn't answer. That night, Lily asked if Mara was staying forever. They were at dinner, the three of them around the table, like they'd been doing for weeks now. It was starting to feel normal, which was the problem. What do you mean, baby? Ethan asked. I mean, is she gonna live here forever, or is she gonna leave like Mommy did? The question hit like a punch. Ethan froze. Mara set down her fork carefully. Your mom didn't leave, Lily, Ethan said. She died. That's different. But people leave when they die. That's not... He stopped. Tried again. It's complicated. Are you going to leave? Lily asked Mara directly. Mara looked at her, then at Ethan. He could see her trying to figure out the right answer, the one that wouldn't hurt but also wouldn't lie. I don't know, Mara said finally. I hope not, but I can't promise. It was the most honest thing she'd said since arriving, and Ethan respected her for it, even as his chest tightened. Okay, Lily said. Then she went back to eating like it was settled. Later, after Lily was in bed, Mara found Ethan on the porch. I'm sorry, she said. I didn't know what else to tell her. You told her the truth. That's more than most people would have done. She deserves better than this. Yeah, well, we're doing the best we can. Mara sat down next to him. The night was cold, stars sharp overhead. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called out. I think about leaving sometimes, Mara said quietly. Just getting in my car and disappearing, going somewhere they'd never find me. Why don't you? Because running doesn't fix anything. It just delays the inevitable. And staying here does? Maybe. I don't know. She pulled her knees up to her chest. When I first got here, I thought this was temporary, a pit stop. But now what? Now I'm not sure what it is. Ethan looked at her. In the dim light, she looked younger, vulnerable, human in a way she usually kept hidden. Me neither, he said. They sat there in silence, two people caught in a lie that was slowly becoming something else, neither of them willing to name it. The week passed slowly. Tommy called back on Thursday. Found something, he said. Ethan's pulse kicked up. What? Your aunt's been busy. She's got stakes in 3 different shell companies that have been buying up land around your property. Looks like she's planning to develop it. Develop it into what? Some kind of resort. Golf course, luxury cabins, the whole deal. But she needs your land to make it work. Without it, the project's dead. Ethan felt something cold settle in his stomach. How long has she been planning this? At least 2 years, maybe longer. And she never told me. Why would she? If she can push you out, she gets the land cheap and makes a fortune. Ethan thanked him and hung up. When he told Mara, her expression went sharp. We can use this, she said. How? If she's been hiding financial interests, lying to investors, manipulating land deals, that's fraud. We expose her. She loses credibility, maybe even faces charges. You sure about that? I've dealt with people like her my whole life, trust me. Once their reputation cracks, the whole thing falls apart. Ethan wanted to believe her, wanted to think they could actually win this, but doubt was a hard habit to break. What do we do? He asked. We gather proof, solid, undeniable proof. Then we bury her with it. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about Ruth and the farm and the fight that was coming, thinking about Mara, about Lily, about promises he'd made and ones he couldn't keep. Around 2 a.m, he heard footsteps in the hall. He got up and found Mara in the kitchen, standing by the window. Couldn't sleep either? He asked. She shook her head. Every time I close my eyes, I see them, the board members, the people who smiled to my face and then voted to push me out. You'll get it back. You don't know that. No, but I believe it. Mara turned to look at him. Why? Because you're too stubborn to lose. A small smile crossed her face. Takes one to know one. They stood there in the dark kitchen, the farm silent around them. Outside, the field stretched endlessly, holding secrets and history and blood. We're going to win this, Ethan said. Both of us, whatever it takes. Mara nodded, and for the first time since she'd arrived, he thought she might actually believe it. The proof came in pieces over the next 2 weeks, and each piece made the picture uglier. Tommy sent files first. Bank records showing Ruth's shell companies funneling money through 3 different states. Property deeds with signatures that didn't quite match. Email chains between Ruth and developers discussing timeline projections that hinged on acquiring the coal farm by any means necessary. The phrase "by any means" appeared 4 times across different messages, and each time Ethan read it, his anger burned hotter. Mara spread everything across the dining room table like she was building a case for trial. Which, in a way, she was. She worked methodically, highlighting connections, drawing lines between transactions, creating a narrative that even a skeptical jury couldn't ignore. She's been planning this since before your father died, Mara said, tapping a document dated 6 years back. Look at this. She was already buying adjacent properties, setting up the infrastructure. She just needed your land to complete the picture. Ethan stared at the paperwork. His father had trusted Ruth, had put her in charge of family finances when he got sick, thinking blood meant something. And she'd used that trust to position herself for a land grab that would have made her millions. How much is this resort worth? He asked. Conservatively, $40 million once it's operational. Could be more depending on how well it's marketed. And she was going to buy my land for what? $500,000? If that. More likely she'd wait until you were desperate enough to take whatever she offered. Ethan's hands curled into fists. I want to bury her. We will. But we need more than financial records. We need witnesses. People who'll testify that she engaged in fraud, coercion, maybe even criminal intimidation. Good luck finding anyone willing to go against Ruth Cole in this county. Mara looked up at him. You'd be surprised what people will do when they realize they're on the losing side. She was right, but finding those people proved harder than either of them expected. Most folks who'd had dealings with Ruth either worshipped her or feared her, and neither group was interested in talking. Ethan spent 3 days making calls, visiting neighbors, trying to find someone who'd seen something or heard something they could use. He came up empty until he talked to Martin Ruiz. Martin owned a small ranch about 10 miles east. He'd sold Ruth a parcel of land 2 years ago, and when Ethan mentioned her name, Martin's face went hard. That woman's a snake, Martin said. They were standing in his barn, the smell of hay and horses thick around them. She told me she was buying the land for conservation, said she wanted to protect it from developers. Then 6 months later, I see bulldozers clearing it for roads. You have proof? I got the contract she made me sign. Says right in there, conservation purposes only. I was stupid enough to believe her. Would you testify to that? Martin hesitated. Testify where? Court, if it comes to that. Or just give a statement we can use to show a pattern of fraud. She'll come after me. She's already coming after me. At least if we fight together, we've got a chance. Martin studied him for a long moment. Then he nodded. All right, but you better make it count. Ethan shook his hand and left, feeling like maybe, just maybe, they had a shot at this. When he told Mara, she smiled. Actually smiled, not the tight professional expression she usually wore, but something genuine. That's good, she said. That's really good. We need at least 2 more like him, but it's a start. They found the second witness 3 days later. Ellen Cartwright, a widow who'd been pressured into selling her property at a steep loss after Ruth convinced the county to rezone the land in a way that tanked its value. Ellen was scared, but she was also angry, and anger made people brave in ways fear never could. The third witness came from an unexpected source, a man named Dennis Pryor, who worked construction and had been hired by one of Ruth's shell companies to do site prep on the resort project. He'd quit after overhearing conversations about bribing county officials and manipulating environmental impact reports. He had recordings. Not enough to be admissible in court without proper authentication, but enough to show intent. Mara compiled everything into a file that looked professional enough to intimidate anyone who opened it. Then she called Greaves and told him to prepare for war. We're going public with this, she said during a conference call Ethan listened to on speaker. I want Ruth Cole exposed for exactly what she is. That's a bold move, Greaves said. If we're wrong about any of this, she'll sue you into oblivion. We're not wrong. You better hope not. After the call ended, Ethan looked at Mara. You sure about this? No, but I'm doing it anyway. That seems to be your approach to everything. It's kept me alive so far. They were standing in the kitchen, late afternoon light slanting through the windows. Mara looked exhausted. She'd been working 16-hour days, barely eating, running on coffee and stubborn determination. Ethan had tried to get her to slow down, but she wouldn't listen. When's the last time you slept? He asked. I don't know, Tuesday? That was 4 days ago. I'll sleep when this is over. You'll collapse before then. Mara rubbed her eyes. I can't afford to collapse. You can't afford not to. Ethan stepped closer. You're no good to anyone if you burn out completely. I'm fine. Stop saying that. You're not fine. You haven't been fine since you got here. Mara's jaw tightened. What do you want from me, Ethan? I want you to be honest. I want you to stop pretending you're made of steel when you're clearly about to break. And then what? Fall apart? Let you take care of me? Would that be so terrible? She stared at him. For a second he thought she might actually let her guard down. Then she grabbed her laptop and walked out of the room. Ethan stood there feeling like he'd lost another fight he hadn't meant to start. That Sunday, Ruth made her move. It started with a visit from Sheriff Whitmore. He showed up mid-morning, looking apologetic but official. Ethan met him on the porch. Ethan, need to talk to you about something. What now? Got a complaint filed against you. Welfare fraud. Someone's claiming you're misrepresenting your household income to receive benefits you're not entitled to. Ethan felt his stomach drop. That's garbage. I'm not on welfare. I know, but the complaint's been filed, and I gotta follow up. County's sending an investigator. When? Tomorrow, probably. Just wanted to give you a heads up. After Whitmore left, Ethan found Mara in the barn. She was on the phone again, pacing, her voice tight with frustration. When she saw him, she ended the call. What happened? He told her. Mara's expression went cold. She's trying to tie us up in investigations, make us too busy defending ourselves to attack her. It's working. No, it's not, because we're not going to let it. Mara pulled out her phone and made a call. Greaves, we're moving up the timeline. I want everything we have on Ruth Cole delivered to the county prosecutor's office by end of business today. That's not enough time to... Make it enough time. She just escalated. We escalate back. She hung up and looked at Ethan. This ends now. You sure we're ready? We're ready enough. The county prosecutor was a man named Harold Vinson. He'd been in office for 12 years and had a reputation for being thorough, fair, and impossible to intimidate. Greaves delivered the file personally and called an hour later to report that Vinson had agreed to review it. 2 days later, Vinson requested a meeting with Mara and Ethan. They drove to the courthouse together, neither of them speaking much. Ethan wore the same suit he'd worn to the wedding. Mara wore black again, her armor. In the harsh fluorescent light of Vinson's office, they both looked like people preparing for battle. Vinson was in his 50s, balding, with eyes that didn't miss anything. He gestured for them to sit. I've reviewed your file, he said, getting straight to it. It's compelling, but it's also incomplete. Incomplete how? Mara asked. You've got evidence of financial misconduct, possibly fraud. You've got witness statements about misrepresentation, but you don't have direct proof that Ruth Cole engaged in criminal behavior. Everything here can be explained away as aggressive business practices. What about the bribery? Ethan asked. The recordings Dennis gave us? Hearsay unless we can authenticate them and get corroborating testimony. And even then, it's a he said, she said situation. Ruth Cole has a spotless public record and a lot of friends in this county. Taking her down requires more than what you've brought me. Mara leaned forward. What do you need? I need proof of a crime. Real, undeniable proof. Something that even her lawyers can't spin. Like what? Vinson hesitated. Like evidence that she directly ordered illegal activity? Witness testimony from someone inside her operation. Financial records showing payments for illegal services. Something concrete. Ethan felt the hope that had been building start to deflate. We don't have that. Then get it. Because without it, all I can do is ask some uncomfortable questions that she'll dodge with expensive lawyers. They left the courthouse in silence. Halfway home, Mara punched the dashboard hard enough to hurt her hand. Damn it! We'll find something else, Ethan said. We don't have time. She's closing in on every side. The investigations, the rumors, the attacks. It's only a matter of time before she finds a way to force us out. So what do we do? Mara stared out the window. We get someone on the inside to flip. Who? I don't know yet. But Ruth's operation is big enough that someone in it has a conscience or a grudge or just wants to save themselves. We find that person. It took a week to identify the weak link. Her name was Patricia Newell, and she'd worked as Ruth's personal assistant for 5 years. Ethan knew her vaguely from town, a quiet woman in her 40s who kept to herself. Mara found out through some calls to her investigator that Patricia had been looking into employment lawyers recently. Whatever was happening in Ruth's office, Patricia wasn't happy about it. They approached her carefully. Mara made contact first through a mutual acquaintance, suggesting coffee to discuss a professional opportunity. Patricia agreed, probably because she was curious or desperate, or both. They met at a diner 20 miles outside town, neutral territory. Patricia showed up looking nervous, her hands wrapped around a coffee mug like it might anchor her. I don't know what you think I can help you with, she said before either of them could speak. We think you know things about Ruth Cole that could help stop her from destroying people, Mara said. Including yourself. Patricia's eyes darted between them. I can't talk about my employer. Even if your employer is breaking the law? I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, you do, Ethan said gently. You've seen things, heard things, and it's eating at you. Patricia's face crumpled slightly. I could lose my job. She'd make sure I never worked in this county again. She's going to do that anyway, Mara said. The question is whether you go down with her or help take her down first. What do you want from me? Records. Communications. Anything that shows she's engaged in fraud, bribery, or illegal intimidation. Patricia shook her head. I can't just steal files from her office. We're not asking you to steal. We're asking you to document what you already know. For a long moment, Patricia said nothing. Then quietly, she paid someone to vandalize your farm. I saw the check. It was written to a company that doesn't exist, but I recognize the name. It's her nephew. He runs a construction crew. Ethan felt his pulse spike. You have proof of that? I made a copy of the ledger. I don't know why. I knew it was wrong. Where's the copy? At my house, in a safe. Can you get it to us? Patricia looked terrified. If she finds out, she won't, Mara said. Not until it's too late for her to do anything about it. Patricia's hand shook, but she nodded. 3 days later, Patricia handed over a USB drive containing 6 months of financial records from Ruth's office, bank transfers, ledgers, communications with contractors and county officials. It was everything they needed and more. Mara went through it with Greaves while Ethan paced the living room, too wired to sit still. When Mara finally emerged, her eyes were bright. We've got her, she said. You sure? She paid for the vandalism. She bribed a county inspector to ignore code violations on the resort site. She funneled campaign contributions to 3 different officials through illegal shell donations. This isn't just fraud, it's racketeering. Ethan felt something like relief wash over him. So we take it to Vinson. We take it to Vinson, and we take it to the press. I want her exposed on every front. That'll make her desperate. Good. Desperate people make mistakes. But Ethan knew desperation made people dangerous too. And Ruth Cole, backed into a corner, was going to lash out with everything she had. The article ran in the county newspaper 3 days later, a small publication, but one that reached everyone who mattered locally. The headline read, Local Businesswoman Under Investigation for Fraud and Bribery. The story detailed Ruth's shell companies, the resort scheme, the witness testimonies, and the evidence Patricia had provided. The reaction was immediate. Ruth's lawyers issued a statement calling the allegations baseless and defamatory. The county prosecutor's office confirmed they were reviewing new evidence but declined to comment further. And the town split into factions, some defending Ruth as a pillar of the community, others whispering that they'd always known something was off. Ethan kept Lily home from school that day. He didn't want her hearing things from other kids, didn't want her caught in the crossfire of adult anger and gossip. Mara agreed, though she was too distracted to say much about it. She was already preparing for Ruth's counterattack. It came that night. Ethan woke to the smell of smoke. For a second, he thought he was dreaming. Then he heard the crackle of flames and his entire body went ice cold. He grabbed the shotgun and ran downstairs. Through the kitchen window, he saw it. The barn was on fire, flames climbing the walls, black smoke billowing into the night sky. "Mara!" he shouted. She appeared at the top of the stairs, already dressed, already moving. "Get Lily. I'm calling 911. Ethan ran to Lily's room. She was sitting up in bed, eyes wide and terrified. "Daddy, what's happening?" "We need to go outside, baby, right now." He scooped her up and carried her downstairs. Mara was on the phone, her voice clipped and controlled, giving the address to the dispatcher. Outside, the heat from the fire was intense, even from the house. The barn was fully engulfed now, flames reaching toward the sky like claws. The security guys appeared from wherever they'd been stationed. One of them was already running toward the barn with a fire extinguisher that was useless against a blaze that size. "Stay back!" Ethan shouted. "The whole thing's going to come down!" He stood in the yard, holding Lily, watching 100 years of history burn. The tractors were in there, tools that had belonged to his grandfather, equipment he couldn't afford to replace. The flames didn't care about any of it. Mara stood beside him, her face lit by the fire, her expression carved from stone. "She did this," Ethan said. "I know. She's trying to burn us out. I know." The fire department arrived 15 minutes later, but by then the barn was a total loss. They managed to keep the flames from spreading to the house, but that was the only victory. By the time the sun came up, all that remained was a smoking pile of charred wood and twisted metal. Sheriff Whitmore showed up with the fire marshal. They walked the perimeter, took photos, asked questions. The marshal said it looked like arson. Accelerant used, multiple points of origin. Someone had wanted this barn to burn fast and hot. "You got any idea who might have done this?" Whitmore asked, though his tone suggested he already knew. "Yeah," Ethan said. "I got an idea." "Can you prove it?" "Not yet." Whitmore sighed. "Then there's not much I can do except file a report and hope we find evidence." After he left, Ethan stood in the ruins, ash settling on his clothes, the smell of burnt wood thick in his lungs. Everything he'd been trying to hold on to felt like it was slipping through his fingers. Mara found him there an hour later. She didn't say anything, just stood next to him in the wreckage. "I'm sorry," she said finally. "Not your fault. Isn't it? If I hadn't come here, if I hadn't dragged you into my fight—" "Stop." Ethan turned to face her. "This was always going to happen. Ruth's been waiting for an excuse to destroy me for years. You didn't cause this. You just gave her a target. That's not better. Maybe not, but it's the truth." They stood there in the ashes of what used to be, two people who'd started as strangers and somewhere along the way become something neither of them could name. "What do we do now?" Mara asked. Ethan looked at the burned barn, at the farmhouse still standing, at the fields beyond that had survived worse than this. "We fight back," he said. "Harder than she's ever seen." The fire marshal's report came back 48 hours later, confirming what everyone already knew. Arson. 3 separate ignition points, all doused with gasoline. Whoever set it had wanted to make absolutely sure the barn burned to the ground. The report noted tire tracks near the back fence, boot prints in the mud, and trace evidence that would take weeks to process through the state lab. Ethan read it twice, then handed it to Mara without comment. She scanned it quickly, her jaw tight. "This is evidence," she said. "Evidence we can't use until they match it to someone." "Then we push Vincent to move faster. Get warrants for Ruth's property, her vehicles, her employees." "On what grounds?" "We can't prove she did it. She paid for the vandalism before. That establishes a pattern." "Patterns aren't proof." Mara slammed the report down on the table. "Then what do you want to do? Wait for her to burn down the house next time? Wait until she hurts Lily?" The mention of his daughter made Ethan's blood run cold. He'd been thinking the same thing since the fire, imagining worst-case scenarios that kept him awake at night. Ruth had crossed a line. There was no telling where she'd stop. "We need to get Lily out of here," he said. "What?" "My sister lives in Iowa. I'll call her, see if Lily can stay there for a while, at least until this is over."
Mara stared at him. You think it's that bad? I think Ruth just proved she's willing to destroy property in the middle of the night while we're sleeping. Next time she might not care if we're inside. The thought hung between them like smoke. Mara's face went pale. I'll increase security, she said. Bring in more people, better equipment. That's not enough. Then what is? Ethan didn't have an answer. He walked to the window and looked out at where the barn used to be. The insurance adjuster had come yesterday, taken photos, told him the payout would probably cover about 60% of replacement cost. 60% of a barn he couldn't afford to rebuild, even at 100%. Behind him, Mara made a call. He heard her talking to Greaves, her voice low and urgent, discussing options he couldn't quite make out. When she hung up, she came to stand beside him. Greaves thinks we should file a civil suit, she said. Hit Ruth with a lawsuit for damages, emotional distress, economic harm. Make it public, make it expensive for her. That takes months. So does a criminal investigation. At least this way we control the narrative. Ethan thought about it. A lawsuit meant lawyers, depositions, discovery. It meant dragging everything into the open where Ruth couldn't hide. It also meant burning through money and time they didn't have. Do it, he said. Mara nodded and made another call. That afternoon, Ethan drove Lily to his sister's place in Des Moines. The drive took 4 hours, and Lily spent most of it quiet, staring out the window, clutching her stuffed bear. She knew something was wrong. Kids always knew. Am I in trouble? She asked when they were an hour out. No, baby. Why would you think that? Because you're sending me away. Ethan's chest tightened. I'm not sending you away. I'm keeping you safe. From what? He didn't know how to explain it in a way that wouldn't terrify her. From some bad people who are angry at me, but it's grown-up stuff, and it's not your problem to worry about. Is Mara going to be okay? The question surprised him. Yeah, she'll be fine. Are you going to be okay? I will be once I know you're safe. Lily looked at him with eyes too serious for a 6-year-old. I don't want you to get hurt, Daddy. I won't. I promise. It was a promise he had no business making, but he said it anyway because sometimes that's what parents did. His sister Rebecca lived in a small house on the east side of the city. She was 3 years older than Ethan, divorced, worked as a nurse at Mercy Hospital. When she opened the door and saw Lily, her face softened. Hey, kiddo, you ready for a sleepover? Lily nodded, but her grip on Ethan's hand tightened. Rebecca looked at Ethan. How bad is it? Bad enough. She can stay as long as you need. They got Lily settled in the guest room. Then Rebecca made coffee while Ethan sat at her kitchen table feeling like he'd just cut off a part of himself. Being away from Lily felt wrong, unnatural. You look like hell, Rebecca said, setting a mug in front of him. Thanks. I'm serious. When's the last time you slept? I don't know. What day is it? Rebecca sat across from him. You want to tell me what's really going on? Because the version you gave me on the phone didn't make a lot of sense. Ethan told her. All of it. The marriage, Ruth's scheme, the escalating attacks, the fire. Rebecca listened without interrupting, her expression growing darker. You married a woman you don't even know to save the farm, she said when he finished. Pretty much. That's insane. Yeah. And now your psychotic aunt is trying to kill you. She's not trying to kill me, she's trying to force me out. By burning down your barn in the middle of the night. That's not a far cry from attempted murder, Ethan. He didn't argue because she was right. What does Mara think about all this? Rebecca asked. She wants to fight. And you? I don't know. Part of me wants to walk away. Sell the land, take whatever Ruth offers, and start over somewhere else. But you won't. No. Why not? Ethan looked at his coffee. Because it's mine. Because Dad died trying to keep it, and Mom before that, and I'll be damned if I let Ruth take it just because she's mean enough to burn me out. Rebecca reached across the table and squeezed his hand. Then you fight. But you be smart about it. Don't let your pride get Lily killed, or yourself. I won't. And this Mara woman. You trust her? Ethan thought about it. About Mara sitting with Lily during her nightmare. About her standing in the ashes of the barn. About the way she'd looked at him when she said they were in this together. Yeah, he said. I do. Rebecca studied him. You care about her. It's not like that. Isn't it? Ethan didn't answer. Couldn't, because he wasn't sure what the truth was anymore. The drive back to the farm was long and lonely. Ethan called Mara when he was halfway there.
"She's safe," he said when she answered. "Good." Mara sounded tired. "We got movement on the lawsuit. Greaves filed this afternoon. Ruth's been served." "How'd she take it?" "No idea. But her lawyers already called threatening countersuits for defamation and harassment." "Of course they did." "Greaves says it's posturing. They're trying to scare us into backing down. It's not going to work."
"I know."
There was silence on the line. Then Mara said,
"The house feels empty without Lily here."
"Yeah."
"I miss her. Is that weird?"
Ethan felt something shift in his chest. "No, it's not weird." More silence. Then, "Drive safe." She hung up before he could respond. When Ethan got back to the farm, it was after midnight. The house was dark except for one light in the kitchen. He found Mara at the table surrounded by documents, her laptop open, her hair pulled back in a messy knot. "You should be asleep," he said. "So should you." He sat down across from her. "What are you working on?" "Going through Patricia's files again. There's something here we're missing, some connection we haven't found yet." "Mara, it's 1 a.m. "I don't care." "Well, I do. You're going to make yourself sick." She looked up at him, and for the first time since they'd met, he saw real fear in her eyes. Not the controlled wariness she usually wore, but raw, unfiltered terror. "I can't stop," she said quietly. If I let myself think about what's happening, I'll fall apart. And I can't afford to fall apart." Ethan reached across the table and closed her laptop. "Then fall apart." "What?" "You heard me. Fall apart. I'll be here when you do." Mara stared at him. "I don't know how." "Sure you do. You just stop pretending you're okay." For a long moment, she didn't move. Then something in her face crumpled and she put her head in her hands. Her shoulders shook, but she didn't make a sound. Ethan got up, walked around the table, and put his hand on her shoulder. She flinched, then leaned into the touch like she was starving for it. "I'm so tired," she whispered. "I know. I don't know if I can win this. Either fight, the one back home or the one here. You don't have to win both. You just have to survive them." She lifted her head. Her eyes were red, her face blotchy. She looked human in a way she usually fought to hide. "How do you do it?" she asked. "Do what?" "Keep going when everything's against you." Ethan thought about Sarah, about the years after she died, about waking up every morning and choosing to keep breathing even when it felt pointless. "You just do," he said, "because the alternative is giving up, and that's not an option." Mara nodded. Then, so quietly he almost missed it. "Thank you." "For what?" "For not letting me drown." He squeezed her shoulder. "We're not drowning. Not yet." They went to bed separately, but for the first time since this whole thing started, Ethan felt like they were actually on the same side. The counterattack came faster than expected. Ruth's lawyers filed motions to dismiss the lawsuit, citing lack of evidence and malicious prosecution. They also filed a countersuit claiming defamation, seeking damages in excess of $5 million. The local paper ran a story quoting Ruth's attorney calling the allegations against her desperate lies from desperate people. Greaves handled the legal maneuvering, but the public relations battle was harder to manage. People who'd been sympathetic started asking questions. Maybe Ruth was right. Maybe this was all a scheme cooked up by a broke farmer and his rich wife to extort money. Ethan heard the whispers at the hardware store, at the gas station, everywhere he went. He stopped going into town unless he absolutely had to. Meanwhile, the criminal investigation moved at a glacial pace. Vincent told them the state lab was backed up. The evidence from the fire would take weeks to process, and without something concrete tying Ruth to the arson, his hands were tied. "We're losing momentum," Mara said one night. They were on the porch, the air cold enough to see their breath. "Every day this drags on, people forget why we started this." "So what do? We find the person who actually set the fire. We get them to flip on Ruth." "And how do we do that?" Mara pulled out her phone and showed him a photo. A man in his 30s, heavy build, wearing a construction company shirt. "This is Ryan Cole, Ruth's nephew, the one Patricia said she paid for the vandalism." "I know Ryan. He's a punk, but I didn't think he'd go this far." "Desperate people do desperate things, and Ruth probably paid him well. Even if we find him, what makes you think he'll talk?" Because right now he's facing arson charges that could put him in prison for 10 years. If we offer him a deal, he might take it. Ethan looked at the photo. Ryan had always been trouble, but he'd also always been weak, the kind of guy who folded under pressure. All right, Ethan said. How do we find him? They tracked Ryan down 3 days later. He was working a construction site on the outskirts of town, part of a crew building a strip mall. Ethan and Mara showed up during lunch break, catching him as he walked to his truck. Ryan, Ethan called. Ryan turned, saw them, and his face went white. He looked like he wanted to run. We just want to talk, Mara said. I got nothing to say to you. That's fine. We'll do the talking. You just listen. They cornered him against his truck. Ryan looked trapped, his eyes darting between them. We know you set the fire, Ethan said. I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, you do, and we know Ruth paid you to do it. You're crazy. Maybe, but the police aren't. They've got evidence from the scene. Boot prints, tire tracks, accelerant traces. It's only a matter of time before they match it to you. Ryan's jaw tightened. You can't prove anything. Actually, we can, Mara said. We have financial records showing Ruth paid you $20,000 2 days before the fire. That's not proof by itself, but combined with the physical evidence, it's enough to get you arrested. She'll protect me. Will she? Mara leaned closer. Because from where I'm standing, Ruth throws people away the second they become a liability. And right now you're a huge liability. Ryan's confidence wavered. What do you want? We want you to tell the truth, Ethan said. We want you to testify that Ruth paid you to burn down my barn. She'll kill me. She'll let you rot in prison. That's worse. Ryan looked between them, trapped and scared. I want immunity. We can't promise that. But we can talk to the prosecutor. Get you a deal that keeps you out of prison if you cooperate. How do I know you're not lying? You don't, Mara said. But you know Ruth is. She's already planning how to throw you under the bus. The only question is whether you go down alone or take her with you. Ryan stood there for a long time, weighing his options. Finally, he said, I want a lawyer present, and I want the deal in writing. Done. They called Greaves from the parking lot. He contacted Vincent, who agreed to meet with Ryan's attorney to discuss terms. 2 days later, Ryan signed a cooperation agreement and gave a full statement. He confessed to setting the fire, said Ruth had approached him, offered him $25,000 to make it look like an accident. She'd given him detailed instructions, told him when to do it, where to park, how to avoid the cameras. He'd done exactly what she asked because he needed the money, and because family was family. The statement was enough for Vincent to move forward. He called a grand jury, presented the evidence, and got an indictment. The charges against Ruth Cole included arson, conspiracy to commit arson, insurance fraud, and criminal intimidation. The news broke on a Wednesday afternoon. Ethan was in the field when Mara called, her voice tight with something that might have been relief or might have been disbelief. They arrested her, she said. When? An hour ago. Vincent's office just confirmed it. She's being arraigned tomorrow morning. Ethan sat down in the dirt, suddenly exhausted. We did it. Part of it. The criminal case is just starting. The civil suit is still pending, and she's got resources to drag this out for years. But she's arrested. That's something. Yeah, it is. That night, Ethan called Rebecca and told her it was safe to bring Lily home. She arrived the next afternoon, Lily bursting out of the car and running to him like she'd been gone months instead of weeks. He caught her, lifted her up, held her tight enough to make her squirm. I missed you, Daddy. I missed you too, baby. Mara watched from the porch, and when Lily saw her, she wiggled out of Ethan's arms and ran to her instead. Mara caught her, looking surprised, and Lily hugged her hard. I missed you too, Lily said. Mara's eyes went bright. I missed you. Rebecca pulled Ethan aside while Lily chattered at Mara about everything she'd done in Iowa. She seems good, Rebecca said, nodding at Mara. She is. And you two seem different. Different how? Like you actually care about each other. Ethan watched Mara listening to Lily, really listening, her whole attention focused on his daughter. Yeah, I guess we do. So what happens now? I don't know. We finish this fight. Then we figure out the rest. Rebecca squeezed his arm. Good luck with that. She left before dinner. That night, the three of them ate together at the kitchen table like they had before Lily left. before the fire, before everything went to hell. It felt almost normal, almost like a real family. After Lily went to bed, Ethan and Mara sat on the porch. The night was clear, stars scattered across the sky like broken promises. "What happens after the trial?" Ethan asked. "I don't know. If she's convicted, she goes to prison. The civil suit probably settles. The resort project dies." "And you?" Mara was quiet for a long time. "I have to go back eventually, deal with my own mess." "Yeah. But not yet. Not until this is finished." "And then?" She looked at him. "Then we dissolve the marriage like we planned. You keep the farm, I go back to my life, clean break." It was what they'd agreed to from the start. What made sense? What was supposed to happen? So why did it feel like losing something he couldn't afford to lose? "Right," Ethan said. "Clean break." Mara held his gaze for a moment longer, then looked away. Neither of them said what they were both thinking, that somewhere along the way this arrangement had stopped being fake, that the lines they'd drawn had blurred into something neither of them knew how to name. The trial was set for 8 weeks out. In the meantime, Ruth made bail and returned to her estate, confined to house arrest with an ankle monitor. Her lawyers filed motion after motion trying to get the charges dismissed, but Vincent held firm. The town was divided. Some people believed Ruth was being railroaded. Others whispered that they'd always known she was capable of this. Ethan stopped caring what people thought. He had his daughter back, his farm was still standing, and Ruth was facing justice. That was enough. But Mara was restless. She paced the house, made endless calls, worked on her laptop until 3 in the morning. Something was eating at her, and when Ethan finally asked what was wrong, she told him. "My board of directors is voting next week," she said, "on whether to permanently remove me as CEO. Can they do that? They can try. I still own 40% of the company, but if they get enough votes, they can force me out entirely. What do you need? I need to be there, in person, to fight for my position. So go. I can't leave now, not with the trial coming up. The trial's 8 weeks away. You've got time." Mara looked at him. "You want me to leave? I want you to handle your business. We're okay here. Ruth's neutralized, the charges are filed. Greaves can handle the legal stuff. You need to take care of your own fight. And if I lose, then you lose. But at least you tried." She studied him like she was trying to figure out if he meant it. Finally, she nodded. "Okay, I'll go, but I'm coming back." "I know." "Do you?" Ethan met her eyes. "Yeah, I do." Mara left 3 days later. Ethan drove her to the airport, Lily in the back seat, asking 100 questions about where Mara was going and when she'd be back. Mara answered each one patiently, promising she wouldn't be gone long, promising she'd call every night. At the airport, Lily hugged her tight. "You better come back." "I will. I promise." Ethan walked her to security. They stood there awkwardly, neither of them knowing what to say. "Thank you," Mara said finally, "for everything." "You don't have to thank me." "Yes, I do." She hesitated, then stepped closer and hugged him. It was brief, almost formal, but Ethan felt it all the way through. When she pulled back, her eyes were bright. "I'll call you when I land." "Okay." She walked through security without looking back. Ethan stood there until she disappeared from view, feeling like he'd just said goodbye to something he hadn't realized he needed. The house felt empty without her. Even Lily noticed, asking every night when Mara was coming home. Ethan told her soon, but he didn't actually know. Mara called like she promised, but the conversations were brief and guarded. The board vote had been postponed. Her lawyers were negotiating. She was staying with a friend in the city, trying to rebuild alliances that had crumbled when her father died. "How's it going?" Ethan asked during one call. "It's going." "That's not an answer. It's the only one I've got." A week turned into 2. Ruth's trial date was moved up due to a scheduling conflict. Greaves said it was fine. They were ready, but Ethan wanted Mara there, wanted her sitting next to him when they finally faced Ruth in court. He called her that night. "Trial's in 3 weeks. I know, Greaves told me." "You coming back?" There was a long pause. "I'm trying, but things here are complicated. More complicated than watching the woman who tried to kill us go to trial." "Ethan, I need you here, Mara." Another pause. Then, quietly, I need to be there too. I'm working on it. She showed up 2 days before the trial started. Ethan was in the barn when he heard the car pull up. When he walked outside, Mara was standing next to a rental sedan, looking tired and thinner and absolutely real. Lily saw her through the window and came tearing out of the house, screaming her name. Mara caught her, lifted her up, held her like she'd been drowning, and Lily was air. Ethan walked over slowly. Mara set Lily down and looked at him. You came back, he said. I told you I would. How'd it go with the board? Still fighting, but I realized something. What? That some fights matter more than others. She didn't elaborate, and Ethan didn't push. They walked into the house together, Lily between them, and for the first time in weeks, the farm felt whole again. The courthouse was packed on the first day of trial. Ethan had never seen so many people crammed into one room, all of them hungry for a story that wasn't theirs to consume. Ruth sat at the defense table in an expensive suit, her back straight, her face composed. She looked like someone who'd never doubted herself in her entire life. When her eyes met Ethan's across the room, she didn't flinch, didn't look away, just stared at him with the kind of cold certainty that said she still believed she'd win. Mara sat next to Ethan in the gallery, her hand resting on his arm. She'd dressed carefully that morning, professional but not flashy, and when people whispered about her, she ignored them. Lily was with Rebecca again, safe and far away from this circus. The prosecutor was a woman named Angela Torres, mid-40s, sharp-eyed, and relentless. Greaves had warned them she didn't waste time on theatrics. She laid out facts like she was building a wall, brick by brick, until there was no way around it. Her opening statement was clean and brutal. She described Ruth's scheme in detail, the shell companies, the bribes, the intimidation. She talked about the barn fire, about Ryan Cole's confession, about a pattern of behavior that showed someone willing to destroy anything that stood between her and what she wanted. When she finished, the jury looked shaken. Ruth's attorney, a silver-haired man named Douglas Keene, countered with a narrative about a successful businesswoman being persecuted by a greedy nephew who'd acted alone and a desperate farmer looking for someone to blame. He painted Ruth as a victim of circumstance, someone whose only crime was being successful in a town that resented ambition. It was persuasive. Ethan hated how persuasive it was. The trial lasted 9 days. Torres called witness after witness. Martin Ruiz testified about being lied to regarding the conservation easement. Ellen Cartwright described the pressure campaign that forced her to sell at a loss. Patricia Newell walked the jury through the financial records, her voice shaking but steady, pointing out every fraudulent transaction she'd uncovered. Ryan Cole testified on day 5. He looked terrible, like he hadn't slept in weeks. Under Torres's questioning, he admitted everything. Ruth had approached him, offered him money, given him explicit instructions on how to burn the barn without getting caught. He'd done it because he was broke and because she was family and because he didn't think anyone would find out. Keene tore into him on cross-examination, suggesting he was lying to save himself, that he'd acted alone and was now blaming his aunt to get a reduced sentence. Ryan stumbled through his answers, contradicted himself twice, and by the time Keene was done, half the jury looked skeptical. Ethan watched it all feeling helpless. This wasn't something he could fix with hard work or stubborn persistence. This was lawyers and procedure, and people deciding his fate based on who told a better story. On day 7, Torres called Ethan to the stand. He swore to tell the truth and sat down feeling exposed under the courtroom lights. Torres asked him about his relationship with Ruth, about the farm, about the years of pressure and manipulation. Ethan answered as honestly as he could, trying not to let his anger show, trying to sound credible instead of vindictive. Then Keene got his turn. Mr. Cole, you married Miss Bennett rather suddenly, didn't you? Yes. How long had you known her before the marriage? A few weeks. And she's quite wealthy, isn't she? Ethan saw where this was going. Yes. Wealthy enough to pay off your debts, save your failing farm, and fund an expensive legal campaign against my client? Objection, Torres said. Relevance. Goes to credibility, Your Honor. The witness has a financial motive to fabricate claims against Ms. Cole. The judge allowed it. Ethan gripped the armrest. Ms. Bennett helped me financially, he said carefully, but that has nothing to do with what Ruth did. Doesn't it? Isn't it true that you were drowning in debt,
desperate for money and willing to do anything to keep this farm? I wasn't willing to lie, but you were willing to marry a stranger for money. That suggests a certain flexibility with the truth, doesn't it? Objection? Sustained. Move on, Mr. Keene.
Keene smiled like he'd already made his point. He asked a few more questions, each one designed to make Ethan look opportunistic and unreliable, then dismissed him. Ethan stepped down, feeling like he'd just lost ground they couldn't afford to give up. That night, he and Mara sat in the kitchen going over the day's testimony with Greaves. The lawyer tried to sound optimistic, but his tone was strained. Keene's strategy is clear, Greaves said. He's going to paint you as motivated by greed and Ruth as a victim of a conspiracy. It's thin, but if the jury buys it, we're in trouble. What can we do? Mara asked. Hope Torres's closing argument is strong enough to overcome the doubt Keene's planted. That's not reassuring. It's the truth. After Greaves left, Ethan poured himself a drink and stood at the window. Outside, the fields were dark and quiet. The barn was still just a burned-out shell, a monument to everything they'd been through. Mara came to stand beside him. You okay? No. Me neither. They stood there in silence. Then Mara said, I'm sorry I dragged you into this. You didn't drag me. I chose it. You chose it because you didn't have another option. Maybe at first, but that's not why I'm still here. Mara looked at him. Why are you still here? Ethan didn't know how to answer that. Or maybe he did, but saying it out loud felt like stepping off a cliff. So instead he said, because some things are worth fighting for. Like the farm. Like a lot of things. Mara's expression softened. For a second, Ethan thought she might say something. Then headlights swept across the driveway and the moment broke. It was Sheriff Whitmore. He got out of his cruiser looking grim. What now? Ethan asked, stepping onto the porch. Got something you need to hear. Can I come in? They sat in the living room. Whitmore looked uncomfortable, like he was carrying news he didn't want to deliver. We arrested someone tonight, he said. 2 guys, actually. They were caught trying to cut the security fence on your property. Ethan's blood went cold. Who were they? Hired muscle from out of state. They had cable cutters, gasoline, matches. Looks like they were planning another fire. Did they say who hired them? Whitmore hesitated. They're not talking yet, but their phones had calls to a number registered to one of Ruth's shell companies. Mara leaned forward. That's evidence she violated her house arrest conditions. You can revoke her bail. Already did. She's back in custody as of an hour ago. After Whitmore left, Ethan felt something like relief wash over him. Ruth had overplayed her hand. Instead of waiting for the trial to finish, she'd tried to destroy them one more time and gotten caught in the act. This is good, Mara said. This shows the jury she's still dangerous, still trying to intimidate witnesses. If Torres can get it admitted, she will. This is too big to ignore. Torres did get it admitted over Keene's furious objections. On day 8, she recalled Sheriff Whitmore to testify about the arrest. The 2 hired men had flipped overnight, admitting they'd been paid through an intermediary to burn down the Cole farmhouse with everyone inside if necessary. The intermediary's phone records traced back to Ruth's personal attorney. The courtroom erupted. The judge called for order. Ruth's face went pale, then hard as stone. Keene tried to salvage it, arguing there was no direct proof Ruth had ordered the hit, that her attorney might have acted independently. But the damage was done. The jury looked horrified. Closing arguments happened on day 9. Torres was masterful. She walked the jury through every piece of evidence, every witness, every connection that led back to Ruth Cole. She described a woman so consumed by greed that she'd been willing to destroy her own nephew, burn down buildings, and order the murder of a man and his family just to acquire land for a development project. This isn't just about fraud or arson, Torres said. This is about someone who believed she was above the law, someone who thought power and money meant she could do whatever she wanted without consequences. The evidence is overwhelming, the witnesses are credible, and the defendant's own actions, even during this trial, prove she's guilty of everything we've charged her with. Keene's closing was desperate. He attacked the witnesses, questioned the evidence, suggested the prosecution had built a case on the testimony of criminals looking to save themselves. But his heart wasn't in it. He knew he'd lost. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they came back, Ethan could barely breathe. The foreman stood. On the count of arson, we find the defendant guilty. On the count of conspiracy to commit arson, guilty. On the count of fraud, guilty. On the count of solicitation of murder, guilty. Guilty on every count. Ruth's face didn't change. She just sat there, rigid and silent, while the judge thanked the jury and set a sentencing date for 3 weeks out. When the bailiff came to take her into custody, she stood with perfect posture and walked out of the courtroom like she was leaving a business meeting. Ethan felt Mara's hand tighten on his arm. Around them, people were talking, reacting, but he couldn't hear any of it. All he could hear was that word echoing in his head. Guilty, guilty, guilty. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed them. Ethan pushed through without comment, Mara beside him, both of them heading for the parking lot. When they finally got to the truck, Ethan leaned against it and let out a breath that felt like he'd been holding it for months. "It's over," Mara said. "Yeah. We won." "Yeah." He should have felt triumphant, vindicated, something. Instead, he just felt tired. They drove back to the farm in silence. When they pulled into the driveway, the sun was setting, painting everything in shades of orange and gold. The burned barn looked less like a wound in the landscape and more like something that could be rebuilt. That night, they called Lily. She was ecstatic, barely understanding what the verdict meant, but picking up on their relief. She made them promise to come get her soon, and Ethan said they would. Tomorrow, maybe. Or the day after. After they hung up, Mara poured 2 glasses of wine, and they sat on the porch like they'd done 100 times before. The farm was quiet. Peaceful in a way it hadn't been in months. "What happens now?" Mara asked. "Sentencing in 3 weeks. Then the civil suit probably settles. Greaves thinks Ruth's lawyers will want to avoid more publicity." "And after that?" Ethan looked at her. "After that, I rebuild the barn. Get the farm back to normal. Try to give Lily a life that doesn't involve courtrooms and death threats." "Sounds like a plan." "What about you?" Mara stared into her wine glass. "I have to go back, deal with the board, figure out if there's anything left of my company to save." "When?" "Soon, maybe next week." The words hung between them. Next week. Soon. All the careful distance they'd maintained, all the lines they'd drawn about this being temporary, came rushing back. "And then we dissolved the marriage," Ethan said. It wasn't a question. That was the deal. "Right." Mara set down her glass. "Unless you don't want to." Ethan's heart kicked hard against his ribs. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying this stopped being fake a long time ago, at least for me." "Mara, I know it's complicated. I know I have a life somewhere else, and you have the farm and Lily and 1,000 reasons this doesn't make sense. But somewhere between getting married to save our own skins and fighting Ruth and nearly dying together, I fell in love with you. And I don't know what to do about that." The confession landed like something precious and terrifying. Ethan stared at her, this woman who'd walked into his life as a stranger and become something he couldn't imagine losing. "I don't know either," he said quietly. "But I know I don't want you to leave. Even though I come with an entire company full of people trying to destroy me, even though my life is a disaster?" "Your life's not a disaster. It's just hard. And I'm pretty good at hard." Mara laughed, but it sounded like crying. "What are we doing, Ethan?" "I think we're trying to figure out if 2 people who got married for all the wrong reasons can make it work for the right ones." "That's a terrible plan." "Most of mine are." She kissed him then, and it felt like something inevitable finally happening. When they pulled apart, Mara was smiling through tears. "We're idiots," she said. "Probably. This is going to be complicated. Everything worth doing is." They sat there holding hands while the stars came out, 2 people who'd survived something that should have broken them and come out the other side holding on to each other. Sentencing happened 3 weeks later. Ruth got 15 years on the arson and conspiracy charges, with additional time for the solicitation of murder. With good behavior, she'd be eligible for parole in 12. It wasn't life, but it was enough. Enough to keep her from hurting anyone else. Enough to let Ethan finally breathe. The civil suit settled 2 days after sentencing. Ruth's estate paid damages that more than covered the barn, the lost equipment, and the legal fees. Ethan put half of it in a trust for Lily and used the rest to start rebuilding. The new barn went up over the summer. Ethan did most of the work himself, with help from Martin Ruiz and a few other neighbors who'd quietly taken his side once the trial ended. It wasn't exactly like the old barn, but it was solid, functional, a testament to the fact that some things could be rebuilt stronger than they were before. Mara stayed through the construction, flying back to the city once a week to fight her own battles with the board. It took months, but she eventually clawed back enough support to keep her position as CEO. It was conditional, probationary, but it was hers. She restructured the company, fired the people who'd betrayed her, and built something leaner and fiercer than what her father had left behind. She split her time between the farm and the city, and it was messy and imperfect and sometimes felt impossible. But they made it work because the alternative was giving up, and neither of them knew how to do that. Lily adjusted faster than either of them expected. She'd been through enough loss to know that family wasn't about blood or biology or perfect circumstances. It was about who showed up, who stayed, who chose you every day, even when it was hard. One night, about 6 months after the trial ended, Lily asked if Mara was staying forever now. They were at dinner again, the three of them around the table. It had become their routine, sacred and normal all at once. "Do you want me to stay forever?" Mara asked. "Yeah." "Then I'm staying." "Promise?" Mara looked at Ethan. He nodded. "I promise," Mara said. It was that simple and that complicated. A promise made over pot roast and green beans, binding in a way that legal documents and courtroom vows had never been. A year after Ruth's conviction, Ethan and Mara got married again. A real wedding this time, small and private, just family and the few friends who'd stood by them. They held it on the farm, next to the new barn, under a sky so clear you could see forever. Rebecca was there with Lily, who served as flower girl, and took the job so seriously it made everyone laugh. Martin and Ellen came, along with Patricia Newell, who'd left Ruth's employment and started working for a nonprofit helping expose corporate fraud. Even Sheriff Whitmore showed up, awkward in a suit but genuinely happy for them. The ceremony was short. No fancy vows, no rehearsed speeches, just a promise to keep choosing each other, to keep fighting for this life they'd built out of desperation and stubbornness, and something that looked a lot like love. When the officiant pronounced them married, Ethan kissed Mara like he'd wanted to since the day she walked into his life and turned everything upside down. People clapped, Lily cheered, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, Ethan felt like he'd finally found solid ground. Later, after the guests left and Lily was asleep, Ethan and Mara sat on the porch watching the fields stretch out under the moonlight. The farm was quiet, theirs, safe. "You ever think about how this started?" Mara asked. "Sometimes. If someone had told me a year ago that I'd end up married to a farmer in Nebraska, I would have thought they were insane. If someone had told me I'd marry a billionaire to save my farm and actually fall in love with her, I would have said the same thing." Mara smiled. "We're a walking cliché." "Yeah, but we're alive. We're more than alive. We won." Ethan thought about that. About Ruth in prison. About the farm still standing. About Lily asleep upstairs in a house that felt like home again. About Mara beside him, real and permanent and his. "Yeah," he said. "We did." They sat there in comfortable silence. Two people who'd learned the hard way that survival wasn't pretty or easy or fair. That sometimes the only way forward was to bet everything on something that made no sense and fight like hell to make it work. That family wasn't about perfection or certainty or having all the answers. It was about showing up scared and broken and choosing each other anyway. The farm had been in Ethan's family for generations, passed down through blood and sweat and sheer stubborn refusal to let go. He'd almost lost it a dozen times, almost gave up more times than he could count. But standing here now, with Mara's hand in his and their future spread out like the fields around them, he understood something his father had tried to teach him years ago. Land was just dirt and grass unless you filled it with something worth keeping. And what made it worth keeping wasn't the crops or the buildings or even the history. It was the people you shared it with. The ones who stayed when staying was hard. The ones who fought beside you when the world tried to take everything away. Mara had come to him as a stranger running from a war she couldn't win alone. He'd taken her in because he was desperate and out of options. And somewhere in the middle of fires and trials and nights, when neither of them thought they'd survive, they'd built something neither of them had been looking for. A home, a family, a life that was messy and complicated and absolutely worth fighting for. The stars wheeled overhead, infinite and indifferent. But down here, on this small piece of land in the middle of nowhere, two people sat together and knew exactly what they had. Not perfection, not some fairy tale ending where everything worked out smoothly. Just a chance, a choice, and the stubborn, relentless determination to make it enough. The wind moved through the fields, carrying the smell of earth and growing things. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called out. Ethan squeezed Mara's hand and she squeezed back. And that, in the end, was everything.